Universal Disclosure Podcast proudly welcomes Mr. Paul Hynek.
Project Blue Book, which he was associated with for about 20 years, wasn't really a serious scientific effort to get to the bottom of the phenomena and reverse engineer propulsion systems. It was more of a PR exercise to sort of tamp down hysteria. It wasn't like the village of the nice, happy alien people. This is where aliens were really scary and sort of piggybacked on the growing existential angst that the world had about the newfound nuclear capabilities. So at worst, they're engaging in some longitudinal, long-lasting reptilian hybridization program at the very worst. Or they're neutral or looking out for us. So I say, bring them on. My father was very open to this, and I am. And I just think the intradimensional hypothesis is more interesting and more likely than extraterrestrial. And when I was there with Jacques 4 or 5 years ago, he told me that it was that case that made my father feel more comfortable speaking in public about UFO cases that involved aliens. This is an area where there's not a lot of UFO-oriented research. So this is the sort of fringy part of the edge that I'm taking my flashlight towards. And for me, I just don't really care much what the U.S. government says or does. I think they're a bad faith, corrupt central actor when it comes to UFOs, psychedelics, and cryptocurrency, with what scientists would consider compelling evidence. Then I can get them to lean more into it, and then it would be a snowball, and we would get more, better evidence, etc. And then I think we could really push things forward. And if the government wants to jump on the back of the caboose, they're welcome, but they're not driving the train. And in this case, in this event, Neil Armstrong wanting to sit with my father and talk with him about UFOs indicates that something was there, because he was a true patriot. He was a fighter pilot, right? And he was an astronaut. And for him, in public, to sit with the UFO guy meant something. Just that, no matter what they talked about, that meant that either he had seen something or for another reason had an abiding interest in the phenomena and was comfortable enough essentially displaying that on a cruise ship of his peers.
The following program is presented for general information, education and entertainment purposes only and is not intended to be advice of any kind. The content, views, thoughts and opinions expressed in this program are those of the individuals involved. The use of information on this program is at the user's own discretion.
And here we are again with episode number 16. I think everyone knows what I'm about to say. Welcome one and all, wherever and whenever you may be. This is Universal Disclosure, meeting the moment. My name is Mike, an active UAP/UFO field investigator here in Southern California, with my friend and co-host,
Reverend Stu in Melbourne, Australia.
Reverend Stu, we have a very special conversation coming up today. Are you ready for this?
Oh man, I'm super excited about this, and I'm going to have to rein it in a bit because I'll just ask every single question under the sun today.
That's quite all right. I actually do want to sort of take a little bit of a back seat on this one because I want you to have as much time with this person as possible, because I've already had a little bit in other areas myself. So going back to the beginning is essentially what we're doing. From the late around approximately 1948-ish until 1969, the United States military and Air Force officially and publicly investigated UFO reports around the country. They had 3 different programs: Project Sign, Project Grudge, and the most well-known Project Blue Book. In all 3 of those projects, Dr. J. Allen Hynek was the astronomer who was contracted by the U.S. Air Force to help them investigate and try to figure out what in the heck these people are everyone's seeing in the sky. What is it? Is it a threat to us? Etc., etc. So that's incidentally where the swamp gas term came from, was Dr. J. Allen Hynek. He started out as a skeptic, And really, the Air Force just wanted him to flat out debunk everything. But as he went along and started investigating all these cases, he went from skeptic to, I'm pretty sure he went to believer, actually, which is a pretty interesting journey. And unfortunately, he's no longer with us, so we can't directly ask him some of these questions we want to ask him. But we do have one of his sons, Paul Hynek, who's going to be joining us today in the conversation. So before I go into any more detail, Stuart, what do you think about all that?
Well, there's a question I absolutely want to ask, so if I forget, please ask it. It's was Dr. Hynek at liberty to speak to his family about the details of some of these cases? Because I imagine he held a security clearance.
That's a great question that I don't know the answer to yet. So yes, I will try to remember to ask that if you don't. So with all that said, let's talk about Mr. Paul Hynek. He's going to be talking with us in just a moment here. And Paul Hynek, Chief Financial Officer, has decades of experience in finance, technology, cryptocurrency, and entertainment. Paul is a Wharton MBA and adjunct professor of accounting and finance at Pepperdine University, and the creator of a startup financial projections software that has raised over $1.5 billion for thousands of startups. He works with numerous startups as either a board member, advisor, or part-time CFO, and helps numerous early and mid-stage companies and nonprofits manage their accounting, finance, HR, and investor and donor relations. In addition to his MBA, Paul has a Master of Arts in International Studies from the University of Pennsylvania's Joseph H. Lauder Institute and a BA in French from the University of Illinois.
Wow, Paul is a highly capable man, but I shouldn't be surprised given the brilliance of his father.
Absolutely. And that's another reason why, if we have time at the end, I would like to potentially breach the topic of finance with Paul too, in terms of what happens to the markets as disclosure continues to percolate throughout the world. That might be an interesting subset of our conversations. Maybe even we end up going into a whole new season with that one. But if we have time, I'd like to breach that as well.
Yeah, please do, Mike. That sounds very interesting.
Ladies and gentlemen, Universal Disclosure Podcast proudly welcomes Mr. Paul Hynek. So, Paul, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time here today.
My pleasure, guys.
This is going to be great. So we ask everybody the same first question, and that's a musical question. What is your favorite song or musical artist, and why?
Favorite song? I'm going to go with that old standby Eine kleine Nachtmusik by Mozart.
Okay.
It's got a deeply emotional resonance for my family. And when I hear that song, I can't help but smile.
Awesome. Very cool.
Wow, I like that. And it's very interesting about the embedded emotion in music that doesn't even have any lyrics, that still transmits through the decades.
Yeah. Yeah, that has of any song, it has by far the strongest emotional resonance for me.
Wow, I mean, that's great. I wasn't expecting that. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but that wasn't it. But that's awesome. So if we could sort of get right down to it with you, we want to talk about you, of course, but and also about your dad. Like, what was it like growing up with the first ever UFO investigator in the world, the most well known? I was telling Stuart in the intro, the investigations that I do are actually modeled after the procedures that he created.
Wow.
But what was it like growing up like that? And Stuart, you had a question too. I think we should maybe toss it out right away too, if before we forget, right?
Yeah, I was curious to know how much was your father at liberty to discuss what he was researching with his family? I imagine he held a clearance.
He did have security clearance, and when he left the government, he was free to talk about whatever he liked. Our household was really cool, and not just because of my dad. My mom was super cool. And my brothers, my brother Joel has an Oscar for visual effects, was one of the original suspects for being the Unabomber and made nitroglycerin in the basement and a jet engine in the backyard. So there's a lot of fun stuff going on. And for us, our dad wasn't really a UFO guy. He was an astronomer and an astrophysicist with a late in life side hustle of UFOs. So UFOs were super cool, don't get me wrong, but we didn't really see our dad as a UFO guy much, just as a scientist who was curiously open to the fringy side of science.
Okay, so at the time he was researching these this phenomena, was he able to talk to you about it then, or was it later when he left that role that he was able to suddenly speak about, okay, I'll tell you now what I've been working on, family?
Well, I was about 7 or 8 when he left active government work. So all my conversations with him were after that. And he was, Project Blue Book, which he was associated with for about 20 years, wasn't really a serious scientific effort to get to the bottom of the phenomena and reverse engineer propulsion systems. It was more of a PR exercise to sort of tamp down hysteria. So a lot of it was already public by the time, but we would talk with him a lot about what he thought, where are they from, think beyond government files that detailed what a craft did and how it flew and what the occupants may have looked like, but what the phenomena represented and how to study it, et cetera, which I found to be the most interesting.
Wow. So something just dawned on me. You were saying that Blue Book was more of a PR thing to damp down hysteria. So that basically means that at that time, which would have been shortly after the Roswell crash, and then the years to follow, that there was hysteria. I mean, I wasn't born until '77, so it was before my time. But so it sounds like there was hysteria at that point. So people were just like freaking out at the very idea that there might be other creatures out there that are not us.
Well, these projects, there was Project Sign, then Project Grudge, and Project Blue Book, started in 1947. So this is post-war, beginning of the Cold War, and nuclear fears. And this is still like the era of flying saucers and ray guns. So it wasn't like the village of the nice, happy alien people. This is where aliens were really scary and sort of piggybacked on the growing existential angst that the world had about the newfound nuclear capabilities.
Ah. Okay. So, I mean, in a way, it was potentially maybe done in good intentions to try to keep all this stuff under wraps because they didn't want the people of the world to freak out. And then that just snowballs into, 70 plus years later, we're still trying to, pull the information out of the government, right?
Well, I don't know if really good intentions or not. Someone once referred to Project Blue Book, which had this institutional imperative to explain away everything just to reassure people that they had it covered. Someone referred to it as the Society for the Explanation of the Uninvestigated, because they wanted to stamp solved on every single case. And even with that organizational drive, of the 12,000 odd cases that they officially investigated, they still couldn't find their way clear to explaining about 5% or 700 of them, which was very vexing to them because they wanted to be able to ascribe an explanation for every single case. So their job was just to make the public feel okay that aliens with ray guns are not about to take over society.
Okay. That's really interesting too, because even today with what I'm doing and such, that statistic is pretty like 5 to 7% ish is about the same that we come up with. It's interesting that it's the same kind of statistics still today.
Yeah, that 5% kind of holds fast throughout the decades, which is it is interesting. And that 5%, you'll hear some scientists say, well, that's not significant. Well, it is, because that now amounts to thousands of cases that have been researched by qualified personnel who wanted to find an answer, but had to just throw their arms up in the air and say, we don't know.
Yeah, interesting. I heard a rumor somewhere, I don't remember where, but and correct me if this is incorrect, and I don't know if you can talk about it, but at one point, did your dad maybe bring something home from one of the crash sites that you were like playing with as a toy or something, or did I mess that up?
There are people who think that we had the Betz spear at home, which was from a case in Florida. And I don't think so. we had for a while this great big ball bearing that was kind of the size of a bowling ball, that our dad gave us one time, and we're just sort of kicking around in the basement. But I don't remember seeing any odd properties about it. I mean, I guess if he wants to hide something, just hide it out in the open and give it to his kids to play with. But I have no reason to believe that it was anything but just some weird industrial-sized ball bearing. But that's it. I don't know of anything else.
Okay, so it didn't start like moving around on itself or anything like that.
No, and we were pretty high, and we still didn't see much going on.
Nice.
Your father seemed quite charismatic to me. I can see that comes across in Spielberg's Close Encounter. And for me, he has a bit of a look of an artist, almost like a painter. And I'm curious to know, did he have any artistic leanings or tendencies at all?
Not in sort of classical art, as we'd call it. He just saw artistry and beauty in space, in the heavens. He was very otherworldly like that. He just, sometimes I'd be talking with him, I could just tell he's like off on Alpha Centauri or some far distant place in the universe. So his artistry, he was also not very good with his hands, like building things, etc., or with tools. But he just really thought about sort of the deepest layers of the universe, and that's where he found art and beauty.
Beautiful. I can see him really pondering. He's fantastic in that cameo. I know it's very brief, but you can really see him pondering the whole situation in that cameo. I love that.
Yeah, the original version of the movie had everybody else running away after the mothership lands, and he's doing some hand gestures with the alien, but it just didn't really play well. So they went with the version now where he's one of people in the crowd sort of oohing and eyeing at the saucer that's sort of hovering above the ground.
I love that scene.
Yeah, it's cool. And if you look carefully, when the mothership is coming over the ridge at the site, you can see an upside down R2-D2 from Star Wars and a couple other things from Star Wars, because the model maker on Close Encounters, a guy named Rick Baker, had worked on Star Wars. And just as Easter eggs, attached a couple Star Wars things to the mothership in Close Encounters.
Oh, wow.
That's so interesting. There was a real milieu of space movies then, and I guess Spielberg must be very interested in this topic and may even be a contactee.
Yeah, I don't know. I've talked to him about this and his interest in UFOs, et cetera. He does have an abiding interest in it. I mean, it's hard not to, right? It's whether or not you believe in aliens or dismiss the topic. It's one of the most fascinating and important questions there is. And there's a lot of fun stuff to get into. And certainly he's been involved with it for quite a while. It's interesting that the thing is that I sort of mentioned this earlier, but Hollywood, when they portray aliens, most of the time it's adversarial and as enemies, because you need drama in stories. So it's not the village of the nice, happy aliens, right? It's really nasty ray guns and things like that. But Close Encounters was largely cooperative aliens. Okay, they kidnapped some pilots, yes, but let's not get hung up on that. They were largely friendly. And that was really one of the first representations in the popular media of aliens not coming to exterminate or enslave us.
I'm quite grateful for that, the way those movies are shifting our consciousness. No, I'm being serious. Like, that's important part of our psyche.
Yeah, the thing is that if aliens were coming here either from other planets and or other dimensions, and they had truly hostile intentions, we would know it, or we wouldn't, because we'd be dead by now.
Very true.
So at worst, they're engaging in some longitudinal, long-lasting reptilian hybridization program at the very worst. or they're neutral or looking out for us. So I say, bring them on.
Love it.
I kind of feel like I have to ask, and you don't necessarily, I don't want to get too personal, but have you ever seen a UFO or a non-human entity yourself?
I would say no with an asterisk. I've never seen what I would consider a bona fide UFO, meaning some standard. But if we look at the potential interdimensional realm, then I feel I have communicated with, call them alien intelligences.
Okay, interesting. In one of our a couple episodes ago, we spoke with Dr. Joanna Kiyawa, and she was talking about the liminal space, and we were exploring the idea of spirituality versus UFO. Could they be the same? Could they be different or intertwined? And she had some experiences that were more spiritual in nature, perhaps like what you're alluding to, and then some other experiences that were more UFO related. So, I mean, that's one of the things we're talking about here is trying to figure out, like, are these things all physical, or are they a mixture of physical and non-physical, and that kind of thing?
Yeah, Jacques Vallee is famous for saying that if when all the dust settles, the UFO phenomena is encapsulated solely by the extraterrestrial hypothesis, he'll be disappointed. Because I think a lot of us feel that there may well be an extraterrestrial component. There may not be. But if there is, it's not the entirety of the phenomena. There just seems to me to be obvious that there are elements that are overall meta-terrestrial that go beyond just aliens hopping in a rocket ship and zooming over here.
Has or did this exploration inform or influence what could be termed as your spiritual journey, either yours and or your father's?
Yeah, and my father was not a Vulcan slave to logic type scientist. He had Rosicrucian leanings. I think a lot of people think that scientists or atheists have this reductionist view of the universe, that there's no magic or spirits. My father and most people in my family were very open to the idea of there being some type of intelligence. For us, not likely encapsulated in some guy on a throne. But it's very intellectually dishonest to say there isn't any, call it what you will, magic or intelligence or energy in the universe. 95% or so of the universe is dark matter and dark energy, and we have no idea what's involved in that stuff. So, I'm careful about believing things I want to be true, like life after death, or that, you can eat as much chocolate as you want every day. But my father was very open to this, and I am, and I just think the interdimensional hypothesis is more interesting and more likely than extraterrestrial.
Well, the Rosicrucians are a Gnostic Christian group who were trying to explore phenomena both scientifically and metaphysically. And the movie The Matrix is basically a Gnostic tale. And your brother, I understand, came up with some of the effects concerning and related to that movie, which I find very interesting, that connection there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he created what's called bullet time for The Matrix, which I think is the most iconic visual effect in cinema history. So I'm boasting about my big brother now.
Love that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think you were, well, actually both you and him, I saw both your presentations, and he had played that little clip in that show. It was great.
Yeah. My brother, he's a brilliant visual effects supervisor, 2 Academy Awards. He's very modest. He's an engineer. He's very modest. And I had to coax him into making a demo reel of his movies. And at first he didn't even include The Matrix. And he said, well, I didn't finish working on the movie. I said, well, you were working for a company. You created this revolutionary visual effect. And once you did that, your company said, hey, you figured this out. go help us on this other movie that he won the Oscar for, What Dreams May Come. He said, you created the bullet time, put it in your goddamn reel. So finally he relented and he did.
Oh, wow.
Oh, well, What Dreams May Come is also highly esoteric. I've seen that film as well. It's about, Mike, I don't know if you've seen that, Mike, but it's about essentially the afterlife and how your own perceptions are imprinting on that field, that afterlife experience.
Yeah, and it's a really cool movie, and it's beautiful art design as well.
Stunning. It's like a painting. It's what the film looks like, I'd say.
Yeah, and it's this really cool idea of how the afterlife is what you make it. And, you know, his wife, basically out of trauma for having lost their children, kills herself and winds up in hell. And it's not fire and brimstone. It's an upside down Gothic cathedral with rats and cold water. So it's just completely different from the classical description of hell. And what makes it even more hellish is that she's there for all time, losing her memory. So losing herself just to exist in this, you know, apathetic, boring place. And, you know, Robin Williams, who plays her husband, he's got to go rescue her. And of course, it's never been done, can't be done. And he's got to find a way to do it. And it's just, and get to her heaven. It's just absolutely beautiful to watch.
I think, and I posit, there may be a direct relationship to what you just described and these entities coming into our world to guide us in the same way. It's possible, I think.
I don't know any better. And again, if they were hostile, I think for those of us who feel there are entities besides us, let's call them meta-terrestrial. They could be our collective unconscious. They could be some super secret military. They could be extraterrestrials, interdimensionals, time travels, so extra temporal. They're not here with completely hostile intentions. And so hopefully they're here with much more beneficial prime directive type, and they may be related to us. They may be us and here to just nudge us away from the bad path into, you know, going more towards the light. That's what I like to think.
Yeah, I've kind of come to the same conclusion. That's where I'm landing on this too.
Not to get off topic, but I mean, Paul, you seem to have connections in Hollywood, as it were, and I hear Steven Spielberg's working on a new UFO type film. Any idea of what that is, or when it's coming out, or anything like that?
Not yet, no, but it's very exciting.
Yeah, I'm whatever it's going to be, I'm ready to check it out.
Well, Mike, what are the chances that might be alien related, that film?
Well, I hear that it is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I was asking.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm very interested in this whole esoteric level because I'm associated with Unity Church and also the Apostolic Johannite Church, both which are metaphysical and somewhat Gnostic in orientation. So I was very interested in this whole Rosicrucian level. Now, I read Diana Walsh-Basulka's recent book where she was saying that Jacques Vallee also has these kind of tendencies and leanings. I found that really fascinating.
Yeah, you know, again, scientists aren't always one-dimensional. And my father was looking for the divine by way of aliens. You know, he always wanted to push the boundaries of conventional science a little bit further. So he felt that by operating at the sort of jagged edges of where mainstream science left off, he could sort of bring us a little bit farther in a certain direction to find a little bit more about these sort of nooks and crannies in the cosmos.
Well, a friend of mine who is a brilliant electronics person, who's actually an expert witness in cases here in Australia, told me once that the scientists who make the discoveries are really artists. They're pushing the boundaries, pulling from that ether, creating new things. I would say your father was doing that.
Yeah, that's what we talked about a little while ago, that art for him was patterns in the universe that he could try to connect. Now,
I'm interested in the relationship also between your father and Dr. Jacques Vallee. So I'm already aware now that they shared these sort of Rosicrucian leanings and interests.
Yeah.
How did they meet, and what sort of friendship would you say they had a friendship, or was it more of an acquaintance? Did they work together on cases? What's the dynamic there?
Oh, it was a very close friendship, and I'm friends with Jacques to this day. I've known him my whole life. They were very close friends and co-authors, co-investigators, and our families have been friends. And I went to Socorro, New Mexico with Jacques, which is the location of a famous sighting involving a policeman named Lonnie Zamora. And when I was there with Jacques 4 or 5 years ago, he told me that it was that case that made my father feel more comfortable speaking in public about UFO cases that involved aliens. And this was 1964, where he'd already been well convinced that there was a bona fide phenomena, but still in the mid-60s, it was for a professor to talk about aliens in flying saucers was still a little bit difficult. So Jacques said it was that case that made my father that much more comfortable doing that.
That's very interesting. Now, Dr. Jacques Vallee is represented in the movie, in a sense.
Yes.
There's a character based, let me put it that way, there's a character based on him. Was there a chance that he could have also perhaps had a cameo in the film, I wonder?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, sometimes those things are pretty ad hoc. I had a cameo in the TV show Project Blue Book about my father because I happened to visit the set a few times. And one of those times when I was there, they said, okay, Paul, suit up. We're going to give you a cameo. So they're not always planned out well in advance. And I've been on a lot of movie sets and I've seen that just happen where the director says, hey, get that person as an extra or delivering the pizza or whatever it is. So it could have just been because my dad was there during part of the filming and Jacques was maybe off in France.
Okay, I know that David Lynch takes that approach at times. And I find his work very interesting. Now, he seems to be on this kind of path too, from what I can tell by watching shows like Twin Peaks. I don't know if you ever watched that.
I have.
Okay, so you know what I'm referring to then.
It's been a long time, so I don't really remember.
Well, also in a broader sense, like I'm very thankful about the role that Hollywood does play in raising our collective consciousness and just asking the questions and helping us on this journey to explore these topics. Because otherwise, well, especially in the past, it's be very hard to find information on these topics. And I'm glad that it's more at the fore. Now, another thing now is Spielberg working on yet another movie. And I'm just expressing my gratitude for those artistic individuals.
Yeah, you know, again, a lot of Hollywood portrayals are antagonistic because that's what puts butts in the seat. But, you know, clearly there's unquenchable appetite, insatiable appetite amongst the viewing public for movies about aliens and zombies. So if you make an alien zombie, you've got a blockbuster on your hands.
Are you finding that in more recent times, people are far more interested to talk to you about these topics than in the past?
Well, I think part of it is a function that in the last 5 years or so, I've become active publicly in it. So I have a lot more interactions that relate to it. But growing up, you know, our father was well known in a limited circle, right? And so I'm used to, and my siblings are used to, if people are predisposed to UFOs and such, and then they see our name, which is pretty recognizable, it's very unique, then they'll say, oh my gosh, you must be interested in that astronomer at Northwestern. And so people have find it kind of cool. People have asked me, did we get teased as kids or have I been held back from promotions at work? Well, none of us were ever teased. All of our friends thought it was super cool. And if I've missed out on any professional opportunities, I'm not aware of it. I remember one interview I had to be CFO of a company. I had a couple calls with their board, and the first call I had with the CEO and a controller of the company, the very first question the controller asked me was, what's it like to have the arch villain from Game of Thrones play your father in the TV show about your family? I said, oh, okay, we're going to go there. Okay. And the answer is it's not super creepy at all.
All right, I like that. Now, I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you are interested in some shamanism, maybe plant medicine. I think I might have heard that on one of your interviews that I was watching. I find that layer very interesting too. Now, what got you down that path?
In my younger days, I did my fair share of drugs, including psychedelics, and I had hair down to here. And I gave them up because I prefer clarity over distortion. But 6-7 years ago, I was with a friend who asked where my dad thought UFOs came from. And I said, well, maybe interdimensional. And he said, you should read a book called Alien Information Theory. And I said, Alien Information Theory, that's the coolest book title ever. What's it about? And it's the DMT. So what's that? He goes, oh, it's most powerful psychedelic drug known. One variant is called ayahuasca. And I said, okay, well, what does that got to do with aliens? And he said, well, the idea in the book is that this is a plant medicine technology as opposed to a hallucinogenic drug, and is allowing us to either go visualize, internalize what amounts to another dimension. So, oh, because I've never been able to do a CE5 and summon saucers at my beck and command. But if you do DMT, you can feel like you are in another dimension. I'm game. So purely in the interest of science, I'll start trying that and see if I can find a land bridge between that DMT verse and aliens. So that's what I've been doing.
Well, the first time I heard about that kind of thing was while reading Terrence McKenna's work.
Yeah.
And I now wonder if what you're describing somewhat relates to the what dreams may come idea, where you're projecting or drawing your own ideas. But that also seems to be a layer of...
I just want to hop on your reference to Terrence McKenna, Stuart.
Yeah, please do.
So I looked online because I thought, hey, there's altogether likely that my father may have interacted with him.
Oh, yeah.
What I found, though, was that I found the audio and I found the transcript of a talk he gave at a UFO conference in 1987 after my father had passed away. But several times in that conversation, he refers to something that Jacques had said earlier. So clearly that's Jacques Vallee. So, and I have yet to talk to Jacques about this, that he was at a UFO conference talking about things that Jacques had said. So to me, that was very interesting that Terrence McKenna, who's brilliant, who was the godfather of DMT and psychedelics in general, had a strong interest in UFOs as well.
Ah, that's super interesting. Yeah, I found Terrence one of the most articulate, interesting people that I'd ever looked into. I'm absolutely in awe of his work. What I was going to say...
He really is.
What I was getting to before was that during some of these encounters, the beings seem to draw from our own consciousness and reflect back to us using metaphors, archetypes that we already are familiar with to impart knowledge or to give us a push in a certain direction.
Yeah, they do all kinds of shit. I have found that explorations into DMT are some of the most fascinating, impactful experiences that I've ever had. They feel real. I can't say that they are, but one of my passions is to develop a protocol for experiencers of all different types of phenomena, ghosts, DMT, aliens, what have you, because I'm not so sure that they're all separate, such that these experiencers, if they so choose, can present evidence to scientists to demonstrate the objective reality of these experiences. Psychedelics are enjoying, indeed, a resurgence in clinical prestige, ketamine, MDMA, psilocybin especially. And so the very first question is not if they're real, but if the experiences that people feel that they have are valuable. And then okay, could they be demonstrated to be objectively real? And to me, I feel, having communicated, I think, with this DMT intelligence, that there is a link with aliens. And so now my passion is to, through DMT explorations, which are more controllable and invocable, see if I can't bring back verifiable evidence of their reality. Now, it's a Hail Mary, I grant you, but it's so tantalizing a possibility that I can't pass it up.
I just want to...
Oh, sorry, Mike, you
if
go
if I could just chime in here real quickly and say it's a great conversation. I love it. But just a quick disclaimer: we're just hypothesizing here, and we're not suggesting anyone go out there and try it in order to interact with an alien or something like that. But there's clinical.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Things.
It's important. It's very important. DMT is a very powerful substance, and I don't blanket endorse that people do it. I think it's fascinating, and I did a lot of research before doing it, and I had a fair amount of psychedelic scar tissue, if you will. So, but there's risk. It's a very powerful substance, and there's no telling what you may experience. So, it's an illegal drug. You can't just buy it anywhere. But if you're interested in it, I would read a lot about it. There's a lot of high-level discussions about it online, and there are a lot of books about it. But tread carefully before you try something this powerful. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Mike, and there's clinical trials going on. Like there's a Canadian company called Mind Medicine that's getting into some of these things too, like small doses of psychedelics for depression, things like that. So it's there's definitely something to it. But I just wanted to put out a disclaimer there. Anyone listening or watching, like we're not saying to do it, right? Anyway, Stuart, go ahead.
Well, that does tie into the next thing I was going to say, which it feels like busting down the doors of perception to our collective Jungian shadow side. And it's like it seems like a strong arm approach, you know.
Well, Jung wrote a book about flying saucers and UFOs, right? To me, a lot of people are working on disclosure. A lot of people are working on crash sites, etc. They've got that covered. My friends Danny Sheehan and Steve Bassett, who are on a cruise right now that I was supposed to be a speaker on, but I injured my leg and I couldn't go. So for me, them and Richard Dolan and others have got disclosure covered. This is an area where there's not a lot of UFO-oriented research. So this is the sort of fringy part of the edge that I'm taking my flashlight towards.
I'm very grateful for that. And that's why I also love Jacques Vallee's work, Passport to Magonia. He put a lot of threads together for me. It was a real, penny dropping moment when I realized, okay, I believe he's onto something here.
Yeah, I mean, Jacques gravitated towards consciousness long ago. And, my father's first book is called The UFO Experience, not the UFO sighting. Because what a lot of people focus on is, what did the craft do? How far was it? Was it luminous? Did it exhibit properties that seem to defy our understanding of physics? But for experiencers who report encounters, the actual sighting of a craft is, rarely or not always the single most important aspect of the overall experience. They may well report communications with creatures, let's say, sometimes before, during, and after the experience. And it's those communications that are far more impactful in their reports than seeing some craft hover above the house. So consciousness is what really seems to be the most interesting aspect of the overall phenomenon, at least to me.
Did you ever have an opportunity to speak to Harvard professor Dr. John E. Mack, or do you know whether your father or Dr. Jacques Vallee had that opportunity?
I'm sure they must have. And Danny Sheehan, who I mentioned, was John Mack's attorney. So they must have. And that's actually another thread I want to look up and see what I can find now, but I'm sure they did.
I love the work you're doing. I'm absolutely on board with this.
Cool. Come on over.
Yeah, right on that same note, I'm kind of curious, Paul, if you could elaborate a little bit with what you said earlier about experiencers, if they so chose, could give you some type of information to try to bring some more scientific data into the whole experience. What exactly did you mean? Is there like instrumentation or something that can be implemented, like in an experiencer's house or something? Like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, less instrumentation and diagnostic machines as opposed to the type of communications. So, the sum total of all the evidence for the UFO phenomenon has not convinced a wide swath of mainstream scientists, whether it's exotic alloys or star maps or communications. It just hasn't really moved the needle. And for me, I just don't really care much what the US government says or does. I think they're a bad faith, corrupt central actor when it comes to UFOs, psychedelics, and cryptocurrency. And so I think that we can make progress by having more productive conversations between scientists and experiencers. So what I'm interested in doing is inculcating in various experiencer communities a proactive approach of the types of questions to ask, and the type of information, if they can influence, not control the encounter, especially if they feel they have repeat experiences with the same entity, such that they can bring back information and answers that they shouldn't otherwise have. And for me, the gold standard would be unambiguous, very difficult mathematical questions and answers. So imagine I've got a coterie of famous scientists, Michael Shermer, Seth Shostak, Neil deGrasse Tyson, sitting here. And we have somebody that does DMT or says they're going to go outside and meet an alien or whatever it is, and they are given a very difficult mathematical question. They don't have a cell phone, they can't look it up, and they go have this DMT experience or a lucid dream or a ghost or an alien or whatever, and bring back this answer, an unambiguous answer that's not, Nostradamus-like, in that there will be a red moon over the towered city. That's the kind of language that scientists speak. A lot of people in the UFO and other supernatural communities think the scientists keep moving the goalposts. Hey, we brought you this. No, now we want this. But I know the language they speak because my father was a scientist. We grew up in that household. And I believe that most of these scientists aren't locked in some kind of intellectual Spartan shield wall fending off the heretics. They're just busy. They're doing their own things. And they look at the same evidence that we see, probably don't spend nearly as much time, and just aren't overwhelmed by it. I think a reasonable person can look at the same things that we do and say, yeah, I don't see anything there. It's not intellectually dishonest to do that. So by understanding what speaks to them, and then to the extent that an experiencer can go into this encounter, if they want to sort of demonstrate the reality, and if they have some agency to be able to influence the outcome, then maybe, just maybe, we can start having some of them come back with what scientists would consider compelling evidence. Then I can get them to lean more into it, and then it would be a snowball, and we would get more, better evidence, etc. And then I think we could really push things forward. And if the government wants to jump on the back of the caboose, they're welcome, but they're not driving the train.
Okay, that's cool. So if, is this something that you're still sort of working out, or is it like if somebody out there was tuning in here and they were interested in participating in that, is there something they can reach out to you to be part of that, or is it still like in the planning stages? Or
Well, I'm already working on it. I'm working on it with my brother Joel. So we're putting together this protocol, and I welcome input. I'll make a website soon and post this on there, and I'm working with scientists. So yeah, it's very much a work in progress.
Okay, Cool. When that happens, do let us know too. We'll put the link to that website in the description of this too.
Cool. Thank you.
In the future, people who tune in can check it out. Yeah.
Right.
Well, when you were talking then, it made me think about the archetypal muse and the Promethean mythos about bringing fire from the gods, plucking that information from the ether somehow.
Yeah, hopefully it's not Promethium because that gets a little hot, but
It does.
it'd be fun. I mean, look, again, it's a Hail Mary, but it's an approach that not many people are doing. And so the reward for doing this successfully would be enormous. So I've been trying to figure out what my role could be here long term. And so I think I found something that excites me enough to keep at this, even though it may take a long time before it really bears tangible fruit.
I think your father would be very proud of you, my friend.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So to maybe change directions a little bit here, Paul, what I wanted to do is ask you, especially because you have a pretty impressive financial background as well, and one of the things I've postulated for a while, and it's not my thought, right? But other people have had it too. As in my opinion, disclosure has happened in 2017. It continues to happen, slowly, but some people agree, some people don't. But in terms of disclosure continuing to happen, or perhaps a big event where the president of the United Nations actually comes out and makes a formal announcement, what do you think that would do to impact the financial markets and things like that? Like what would happen there?
Well, I don't presume to know, certainly, but I imagine there would be a lot. I mean, certainly we would have volatility, and that's kind of a four-letter word in finance, but we would see massive swings in, let's say, the stock market, which is one indicator of the financial ecosystem. You would just see, I think, massive sell-offs, because in finance, you talk about risk on and risk off assets. A risk on asset is something that's viewed as more risky, may have high potential return, but it's something that people get nervous about. Like gold is a risk off asset. When the stuff hits the fan and you're really scared, people get very conservative and buy gold because it's not going to go anywhere. So a capital D UFO disclosure would be, I think, at least in the beginning stages, a super huge risk on event. And I think people would be scared and they would sell stocks, buy gold, buy bonds and things like that. Maybe not bonds because that's government. So it would be massive upheaval. We would see runs on banks. A lot of the fabric of society might break down. And then I think things would sort of settle down and then people would become more selective. I think you'd want to go long on like government contractor stocks. I think they would go through the roof. And then technology would be a mixed bag. Maybe the aliens have a better Facebook. So you're going to short Meta. And it would become more selective. And then I think things would build back up. And then just like AI now, there'd be unbelievable opportunities for those who would sort of embrace the new opportunities of having Zorg from Zeta Reticuli on the lawn of the White House.
Okay, Mike, this is very interesting because it ties into that kind of panic, which perhaps the government is trying to curtail. Now, this transition into a new world, if we can take it, or whatever you want to call it, it's going to be a bumpy ride no matter what. I don't think it can be prevented.
Yeah, well, so in Richard Dolan's book, it's called After Disclosure, AD, and they postulated that if such a thing were to happen, it would probably happen like 5:30 p.m. on a Friday, where the markets would be closed, and they would be closed for like 2 weeks after that. Paul, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm a crypto guy. The market's never closed for crypto, so I don't know. Yeah. And here's the other thing about disclosure. If there's something meaningful disclosed, like there are aliens here, is it really the U.S. government who's calling the shots on that, or is it the aliens? And I don't know if the aliens are aware of or are overly that concerned about news cycles. So I don't know.
Love it.
All right. It's had to ask.
With all deference to my good friend Richard.
No, it's a great book though. I think they did a fantastic job at what the speech would likely look like if the president gave it.
Yeah, and Richard, he's a great thought leader in this. He's put a lot of time into, because he was trained in political science, so he's got a lot of experience and knowledge of how government thinks and operates. And he's thought a lot about how this might be an ongoing editorial schedule to sort of, set the narrative in advance and what might happen. So, yeah, okay. So let's say disclosure is going to happen 5:25 p.m. on a Friday. I'm on board. Sure.
Okay. So, well, I mean, all right, let's take the conversation a little further just for the sake of it, right? Let's say that does happen and they did close the markets for let's say 2 weeks afterwards. Like when the markets opened up 2 weeks afterward, would that be enough time for people to digest all this so there's a lot less of the volatility? Or do you think it's not necessarily going to matter so much, like it's going to happen either way? Just postulating.
Yeah, I don't know. I think like to my mind, the last huge systemic shock that we sustained was 9/11. I don't remember, I can't think of anything since then that was as big as that. Well, the financial collapse in 2008, but I mean, for 9/11, which was really an existential gut punch for those of us here in the US, I think the stock market was down for a few days. I think less than a week. And I'm trying to sort of calibrate in my mind, obviously disclosure would be global. Yeah, maybe a couple weeks if we want to look at like how big a shock it would be to the system compared to 9/11. And a lot of that depends on what it's like. Is it, hey, we've been here for a while, just want you to know we're here to help, love what you're doing, guys, just want to nudge you a little bit? Or if it's a little bit more sort of new sheriff in town, I think that would have a big impact on it. But yeah, I think a couple weeks, that's a probably good bet for how long chaos, and then what happens after that? Does the fabric of society break down? Are there riots and things? Are people who are super religious go nuts? But then you have the Catholic Church that's issued an ecumenical saying there is life elsewhere. So since they've had kind of a bad track record with admitting astronomical phenomena, they're certainly not looking to get caught flat-footed this time.
Yeah, very true. We talked about that briefly in other episodes as well. I think it's very fascinating that the Catholic Church is coming out so openly and talking about this topic.
Yeah, I mean, the Catholic Church is curiously forward-looking compared to how they've been before. And for them to do that, a lot of people think it means that they've got aliens in the bowels of the Catholic treasure chest in Rome, right? Who knows? But it's just really hard to know what would happen because it's such a black swan to have this kind of capital D disclosure dropped on us in one fell swoop compared to the sort of frog in the hotter water situation that we've had now.
Well, the Catholic Church have an infrared telescope on Mount Graham, which you're probably aware of now. They're quite happy to look through the telescope.
Right. Well, and I think they've been smart. They got called out before, and I think they're probably the most forward-leaning of the major religions. And yeah, they've just done a 180 in their public stance, kind of like the United States Navy saying, hey, we see these things all the time. We see them in the air, we see them in the water, and we're concerned about the safety of our aviators. We could use some help. It's a remarkably different public stance than that of the United States Air Force in my father's day.
Now,
Yeah.
mentioning 9/11, I remember that Dr. Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project, the conference that was held in Washington, was around about that same time. It might have been immediately prior to that, Mike. Is that about the right time?
Yeah, I do know that there's some, I'll say, conspiracy hypothesis out there that because I think it was like 1 or 2 days after 9/11 happened that was supposed to occur, and there was people saying that I personally can't imagine anyone pulling something like that off so quickly in order to so the idea was like, because Stephen Greer was going into Washington and going to be making this big disclosure statement, 9/11 happened to prevent that from making the airways. But I don't buy into that, but I know that that's a thing out there.
Okay, I hadn't heard that. It's very interesting.
Oh, I thought that's why you were bringing it up.
No, I wasn't. That's around about the same point in the timeline. But what I was going to say was not that there was necessarily a connection between the two events, but there was a push to disclose then, and then another event which took precedence in our consciousness, kind of took over and overshadowed that. That's what I was getting at.
Okay, I mean, that is pretty powerful to think about. I don't know, Paul, do you have any insights or thoughts on that one?
Nope.
Okay. But this has been absolutely amazing. Like, it's really high powered. I'm amazed by the topics we've covered. It's hasn't even been 1 hour, I don't think, Mike. Paul, I understand you had a meeting with astronaut Neil Armstrong. Are you happy to talk to us about that, please?
Sure. So back in 1973, when I was 11 years old, my father told my younger brother and my mom and I that we were going to go to Africa. We thought, hey, that's pretty cool. And he said, well, we're going to Africa, but it's not really the point. The point is going to a spot on the ocean off the northwestern coast of Africa, because that's the best place in the world to see a total solar eclipse. My father was an astronomer, so eclipses were kind of a big deal for us. We're like, hey, cool. How long is the cruise, Dad? 2 weeks. And we're going for free because my dad was speaking, and he said, and we're going to share all of our meals for 2 weeks with one other family at a table, and it's Neil Armstrong and his family. So we thought, oh my God, it's the coolest thing in the world. At that point, Neil Armstrong and maybe Muhammad Ali were the most famous people in the world, and we're astronomers' kids, so we wanted to be with Neil Armstrong. So we did. So we were on the cruise ship, fabulous experience with the eclipse, and spent 2 weeks with Neil Armstrong and his family. And it was just awesome. And I saw an article, I think in 2019, in the Sun newspaper in the UK that showed that it was Neil's request that he sit with our family. And indeed, I know that he talked with my father about creating a new institute to study UFOs that he wanted to be a part of. But eventually, he decided not to, because he was a very reluctant public figure. And there was still in the 70s a lot of stigma attached to the phenomena. But he had an abiding interest in this based, on that talk with my father, and the fact that of all the people in the world, he chose to sit with my father and his family for 2 weeks.
Oh, that's awesome.
There are a lot of cool people on the ship. Neil deGrasse Tyson was on the ship as a kid. Isaac Asimov was on the ship. And I remember these young girls, maybe 20s, asked him for his autograph, and he wrote on their thighs with a Sharpie, Isaac Asimov was here.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So I kind of feel like I have to ask if I was listening to this, I probably would be saying like, oh my God, you got to ask this question, right? Did when you were on that cruise, or at any point after that, did Neil Armstrong sort of reveal anything about? There's all kinds of postulations about when we went to the moon, and maybe we saw some stuff there. Any insight on that at all?
I don't remember anything specific like that, and I think that would have been something he'd say to my dad in private. So I don't have any great revelations on that. But, to me, the phenomena is most interesting not by this or that case, but it's about things like Roswell, where the government, the Army Air Force Base commander says, we caught a flying saucer. And of course, starting the next day, they walk it back. But the fact is, I think the people on that base in Roswell in 1947 had enough technical expertise to differentiate between a high weather Project Mogul weather balloon of rubber and balsa wood and duct tape or whatever the hell it was and mylar versus some alien material. So to me, it's that. They said they captured a flying saucer, and that guy's career was not hampered. That's more interesting than the actual details of that case. And in this case, in this event, Neil Armstrong wanting to sit with my father and talk with him about UFOs indicates that something was there, because he was a true patriot. He was a fighter pilot, right? And he was an astronaut. And for him in public to sit with the UFO guy meant something. Just that, no matter what they talked about, that meant that either he had seen something or for another reason had an abiding interest in the phenomena and was comfortable enough essentially displaying that on a cruise ship of his peers.
Wow.
That's a fascinating insight. I know Dr. Edgar Mitchell was very interested in this too, from talking to Mary Rodwell.
Yeah, and he's very open about it, right? And those are some of the best witnesses. My father would talk about how the Air Force would poo-poo sightings, and he said it was very awkward for them to poo-poo the sightings of their own employees who they had trained. And if you think about it, pilots, especially military pilots, are about the best witnesses you can get. Very good eyesight, trained to operate and, be cool under fire, to report things, to get machine collaboration of a sighting, don't have much to gain by reporting the sighting, and yet they still do. It's like a bad rash on the body of, conventional science.
Definitely. Now, I want to ask you something which might be a bit sensitive, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but I want to talk about swamp gas. Now, why did your father attribute the phenomena to swamp gas? What was his motive? Was he really thinking that was true, or was he trying to obfuscate? What was happening at that point?
So this is in response to a case in Michigan outside a sorority in 1967. And what my father meant to say under great pressure from the Air Force to give an explanation is that part of what was reported could be attributed to kind of gaseous apparitions above a swamp. That was misconstrued to mean that he was saying the whole thing was swamp gas, nothing to see here. That wasn't the intent of what he was doing. But there was a great soundbite, and the press ran with that. And indeed, it angered the local congressman to no end, who was Gerald Ford, who became president some years later.
Thank you for clearing that up. Now, that's opened something else interesting. Now, why was Gerald Ford irritated by that? Did he have an interest in this topic?
Well, right. I don't know. It could have just been him protecting the integrity of his constituents, but, who knows? But there is a letter from him, and that's one of the things that precipitated the Condon Committee, which happened in 1969, which was sort of the rubber stamp academic imprimatur that the Air Force used as an excuse to shut down Project Blue Book.
Okay, I imagine if the Air Force was doing this kind of exploration, that it's quite possible that the Army and the Navy also were doing this kind of exploration and analysis. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, and people tend to think of the government as this monolithic block, but it's all these warring fiefdoms and turf battles, et cetera, even sometimes in the same department or agency. So as early as 1952, it was very clear that Project Blue Book, with which my father was affiliated, was an attempt to tamp down hysteria, not to really seriously investigate the phenomena, and that it was the Air Intelligence Service Squadrons who had the responsibility of responding to all airborne crash sites in the continental United States within 6 hours. And they had Russian speakers, because it wasn't all alien related. It was any kind of crash, perhaps a Russian satellite or Russian plane. And it was them who they would get the juiciest cases, and they would be the team that would lead investigation into some kind of smoking gun incident. And indeed, I believe that's where the Men in Black came from, that there weren't alien apparitions. They were just part of that Air Intelligence Service Squadron mandate to not only collect all the debris that may have fallen there or bodies, but also contain the information fallout and, tell the witnesses that, things like, hey, that's a really nice barn you have there. Sure would be a shame if it caught on fire. You might not want to report this, that kind of thing.
Okay, and there seems to be an intelligence layer above this, and I'm referring to CIA, FBI, that seem to swoop in. And these are anecdotal reports, so I'm not saying that's absolutely true, but there seems to be that level which swoops in and obfuscates or removes data as well.
Yeah, and something as Jacques told me a while ago was very interesting. My father and Carl Sagan used to have a lot of debates, and one of them was, well, if there are all these objects here, how come we don't have reports of them entering and leaving our atmosphere? So shortly thereafter, apparently Carl Sagan was at NORAD, one of the biggest Air Force installations we have in the US. And he saw a radar operator who was, scanning the sky. And he asked the radar operator, hey, have you ever seen anything in the sky you can't explain? And the guy said, sir, yes, sir. And he said, wow, he just admitted it just like that. It didn't take long. And he said, what do you do with those? He said, well, those are uncorrelated targets, sir. So we dispose of them. Because his job was to watch primarily for Russian aircraft that they would understand and have advanced warning on. In other words, they'd be a correlated target, and they would track those. So in his mind, an unidentified object, once they determine it's not really a threat of some kind, is of no interest. So they dispose of those and keep no records, not because it's some cover-up with some shadowy figure pulling puppet strings. It's just not his job. So in addition to whatever deliberate cover-ups there may well be, you just have the banal reality that a lot of people for the military who are collecting this information just look at it as not related to their job and throw it away. And that's perhaps one of the most vexing parts of the phenomenon. It's not, that part isn't a cover-up. It's just people saying, nope, I just want to go home after my shift is done. I don't want to fill out, a DD-214 form or whatever it is.
That's an excellent point, and something I'd never considered. It's not part of their field of inquiry or responsibility. So that's right. They wouldn't be pursuing that kind of investigation.
And clearly they don't really see that, oh my gosh, this is a fast track to promotion to say that I saw something really weird in the sky that I can't identify, even though I'm the radar operator expert. Yeah, that'll work.
That's another good point too. But that reminds me too, when we interviewed with Kevin Day, he mentioned that if they weren't going to be doing that training exercise that day, then none of this might ever be even happening, because he wouldn't necessarily have said or done anything, because there wasn't a threat element to it.
Yeah, I'm friends with Kevin. He's a very compelling figure because, as you know, he was the radar operator on the USS Princeton in the Nimitz carrier group. And he talks about they saw these on radar and the gun camera footage, high power binoculars from the decks of the aircraft carriers. And when you talk to Kevin, he has now had enough time to start thinking about origins and the more esoteric. But by and large, when you talk to Kevin, he will always bring up one issue, and that is his concern for the safety of the aviators.
Yeah,
and to me, that's really fascinating, because if he was looking to make $1 million, which he has not, from this stuff, he would handle this a lot differently. He was a career Navy veteran. He wanted no part of this bullshit. And yet he had no choice but to acknowledge that something happened that a lot of people saw on multiple occasions. And you can just tell it's traumatized him to this day. And he is gradually coming to terms with this. But he is, to me, such a compelling figure because you just tell he's an honest patriot who would rather not have been involved with this at all, but was there. And now, because he thinks it represents a security threat, not to the national security of the interests of the United States so much, but to just of Navy pilots, Navy aviators, that's what he wants to talk about. So it's like if somebody does something and you don't believe they did it last night, but if they talk about some type of detail that they couldn't have known or wouldn't think about, obviously, it becomes a little bit more interesting. And so Kevin Day is a great example of that to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found him very sincere. I was very happy with the interview we did with him. Paul, I also wanted to ask you, what do you think is behind this more recent push for disclosure with people like David Grush and Lou Elizondo? Why is this coming to the fore again? I guess it could be connected to the Tic Tac, maybe.
Well, I don't really know. Part of it is my friend Danny Sheehan's adroit maneuverings behind the scenes to draft legislation and to work with inspectors general of different departments to get them as allies on the side of disclosure, because most people in the military don't care about disclosure and compliance. They're there for full spectrum dominance, and they're not about to give up crown jewels. But the inspectors general in their departments are there for compliance. So Danny Sheehan is doing yeoman's work in getting them to work on behalf of the citizenry and to shine a light on the phenomena. I think part of it is just over time, we've had more and more and more people come forward, more people feel more comfortable. And you see this sort of cascade or snowball getting bigger of people coming forward and saying, enough is enough. I've got information I got to get off my chest. And a lot of them are very compelling. And you can tell they're, like Kevin Day, you can tell they're troubled. And they don't always want to talk about it. So I don't know, 2017 with the New York Times, the newspaper of record, was really a catalytic event in making it more acceptable, I think, for people to come forward. And now, based in large part on the work of Danny Sheehan, there's legislation that gives whistleblower protection and releases people from security clearances, which we've never had before. So there's a lot more sort of air cover, if you will, for people in the military to come forward and congressional mandates to do just that.
I didn't want to interrupt you, Paul, while you were talking, but did the earth just move under your feet? Because I just totally felt a little earthquake here.
I think I jostled the laptop, which I have sitting on top of a couple of books here. So
no. It shook underneath me. I was just wondering if you felt it up there where you are too.
Oh, maybe it was that then. I'm here in outside LA, and we certainly have earthquakes.
But anyway, I was just. I briefly took Danny Sheehan's course with Ubiquity University several months ago, and got to listen to a bunch of his lectures and get brought up to speed as to what he's been doing the last several years and what's sort of in the works right now today. So it was pretty fascinating, and in a way that was part of the inspiration. I mean, there's a bunch of different people and events that sort of inspired Stuart and I to do this, but that was a little bit part of it too. Just to kind of take an active role in things.
Danny Sheehan is a force of nature. And Danny Sheehan is a force of nature. I'm skeptical about disclosure in general. I've seen government disinformation campaigns. And if I'm the military, I don't care what your subpoena says. I don't care what the Constitution says. I'm here. You want me on that wall. I think that's the attitude a lot of these people have. But they haven't met the likes of Danny Sheehan, who was involved with the Pentagon Papers and Karen Silkwood and John Mack and other things. And if there's anybody who can do the legal maneuverings to make this happen, it's Danny Sheehan, Esquire.
I would have to agree. It's certainly coming a long way, and it's exciting to see what's going to happen next, right? I mean, I know there's a lot of talk out there of various things, but, I guess I'll just wait and see what comes out. But it sounds like there's more stuff brewing, as it were, right?
Yeah, I mean, the temperature is certainly getting hotter. And, like with a Steve Bassett or Richard Dolan editorial calendar, things are heating up. That's true. And look, I welcome disclosure. I'm just not as optimistic about it as many others.
It's interesting and fascinating to me about the different viewpoints and aspects of disclosure. Now, I agree. Like I'm all for it too, but I do feel like it happened already, but it just didn't happen in a big enough way that I guess that a lot of people wanted or whatnot. So I find it fascinating that some folks are talking as though like it hasn't happened yet at all, or it's never going to happen. But in my opinion, we've had partial disclosure. Even go back to like the 50s, I think was, I don't remember the name of the Air Force guy, but he was on the air doing a thing like, we've investigated, all these reports and most of them are explainable. There's a few that aren't, but they're not of menace. Well, so they just admitted, even way back then, they admitted that, like, we don't know what these things are. Yeah. So it's for the second time, I guess, we had disclosure, as it were. But that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, look, a lot of people feel that disclosure is a process, not an event. I mean, we were sort of brought up on the notion that disclosure was a flying saucer landing on the lawn of the White House and someone like a Walter Cronkite declaring that we have now disclosed or been disclosed or exposed or whatever you say about the phenomena. But now, if you think about it, this is not your father's disclosure. If the Biden administration announces this, half of the U.S. is not going to believe it, and vice versa. So if you are in the disclosure business and you're the government, your job is a lot harder than it would have been 20 years ago.
Very true, yeah.
Well, I believe there were some craft or lights that flew over Washington in the 50s. I got a recollection of some event like that.
Well, there was
in 1952, there was what they call the Washington UFO flap, where Truman dispatched fighter jets into the sky to shoot down objects that were appearing repeatedly over the nation's capital.
Wow, well, maybe they were trying to park on the lawn, but there was no valet parking available at that point.
Yeah.
Perhaps, yeah. I remember there was an episode of that specifically in that series that you were talking about earlier about your father.
Yeah, that's right.
About Blue Book. So yeah. So Paul, before we sort of let you go here, if anyone wants to reach out to you, just like in general, or maybe learn more about what you're doing, is there anywhere that they can go to connect with you?
Well, I have a pretty anemic social media footprint, but I am on Twitter at Paul Hynek.
Okay. Yeah, we'll put that out in there just in case anyone wants to do that. And really thank you for your time and visiting with us. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege to talk with you, especially about everything that we talked about today.
Cool. I enjoyed it, boys. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your amazing transparency.
Sure. My pleasure.
All right, Stuart, what do you think? What are your thoughts on all that?
That was absolutely fascinating. I've learned a bunch of new things that I wasn't aware of before. And once again, I was super impressed with the transparency of our guest. That was very, very giving.
Yeah, he's a very, very open guy, and I wasn't expecting to talk about the psilocybin DMT kind of stuff, but it's all good, right?
Yeah, well, I'm glad we've got that disclaimer at the start of the podcast, and I am grateful that you mentioned that during the interview. So that's a bit of caution.
Yeah, and Paul himself even said, it's very serious stuff, so it's not to be taken lightly, as it were, or messed around with.
Well, it's a very interesting topic, just the same. I haven't really explored that avenue, but I'm aware of it from reading Terrence McKenna's books.
Yeah, you had mentioned that in one of our first, either the first or second episode, I think it was. You briefly touched upon that, and I sort of said something similar to what I just did today. But anyhow, that's all part of it, and I think it's pretty cool that and interesting that he's going down that avenue and starting an organization of sorts to explore in a way that people aren't exploring yet.
Yeah, I really appreciate and respect that about him, and I'm very interested in his research and his exploration into these topics, and I'm very grateful that he came on our show to talk about all that.
Absolutely, me too. And I do want to say something as well. I don't know what happened there when he was sort of towards the end. He was talking about Daniel Sheehan as being a force to be reckoned with, and he is. But I totally felt my floor. I have a concrete floor, hardwood on top of concrete, and the whole floor was. I know what an earthquake feels like that. But when we took our little break here before the debrief, I did check, and there wasn't anything. There was like a 1.2 that I don't think happened at that time, and I probably wouldn't have felt it. But I don't know what it was. At this point, nothing's registering, but I totally felt the earth move under my feet during that little segment there.
Well, that's also interesting because that's one of the subjects we connected on, earthquakes. As I mentioned in the previous podcast, I was working on a song, an instrumental piece, and felt the earth move under my feet.
Yeah, that was our very, very first episode there. And you had captured, actually, you know what, if we can just talk about this just for a couple minutes, I think it's kind of interesting, potentially relevant, right, in case that it actually was what happened just now. You captured something during that earthquake in an audio recording, and it was like a frequency, a very freaky frequency where it was flat line, like the zero line normal audio wave goes above and below zero. This was completely flat at zero, and it was only poking down, sounded kind of like a staticky thing, and it was just eerie to look at. And I think there's significance to that little signal that you caught way back then.
Yeah, it's very mysterious. I was working on a song. An earthquake occurred at the time I was working on the song. I listened back to my track, and I had a contribution by the earthquake. I guess it was a collaborative event then.
Yeah, I don't know what to call it, but I do think that there's some significance in that recording that you captured, and maybe at some point soon, if there's any perhaps geologists out there, I can privately share more information about that, and maybe even that recording as well, because I think there's something in there of interest. But nonetheless, that's way off topic. So anyway, before we go into another episode right now, let's cut that one short, right? So as a reminder, we are on audio only everywhere. We're on YouTube. You can check us out on universaldisclosurepodcast.com. All of our guests' information is in the descriptions as well as on our website. And thank you all for comments and likes, subscribes, shares, and all that good stuff. We do appreciate it, and do keep them coming.
Thank you for being on this journey with us. Much love to you, Mike, and everyone out there.
You too, Reverend Stu, and we'll see you real soon.